So today I want to do things a little different. I've been making a few movies that, in all fairness, have been mostly me just trying out, improvising, talking about things that I find interesting or things that are currently on my mind. That's fine, right? I enjoy trying that out, and I hope you enjoy watching. But I also have a few subjects or a few things that I like to talk about or think about mostly, and I have been for a couple of years, that I am ready to kind of present to you and see if it's helpful to you. Now, most of these are what I would call meta tools or thinking tools, or these are basically ideas that I've gathered through time as I've seen things develop and see how things work, and they help me or they aid me in understanding and approaching subjects so that I can see them more clearly. I can see what's going on. I can see what the context of things is, and it's just really helpful. And the first thing I want to talk about is what I call the MetaFlow model. Now, the MetaFlow model is not an official title, and perhaps it's known under another title, right? I never pretend to have original content or original ideas, in the sense that, you see, what I've done through life is just, I like to read and I like to think. And what I do most of the time is I read a book and then I think about it. And through thinking on that book and what I encounter in real life, I come up with new ideas and I come up with new ways of looking at things, and I try to figure out how things work. And what happens often is that when I present my findings, right, which are based on other people's ideas, plus my experience, I then present, well, this is what I figured out. This is how something works. And then someone says, well, that's so cool. I just read that in another book. Or, do you know, that's already a model that's been known for 200 years. And that's fine, right? If I can give you a tip when it comes to understanding what's going on in life, is that it's just like math, right? It's about doing the math. The solution or the answer to the question is irrelevant, right? It isn't about being able to answer all questions correctly when someone asks you how things work. It's to live in a world where you see how things work, where you understand how things work. And what I find is that in order to be able to truly be flexible, to be able to deal with whatever comes your way, you need to be able to do the math. So what I've done is I've tried to figure out how things work. And not necessarily so I can present the answer, but to understand how they work. And that's what I try to present to you, is my understanding of how that works. Because in this society, in the way we do things, people often emulate. They often repeat what they've heard, right? I think it's something that on TV has become the main thing, right? Talking heads. You pick a talking head, I pick a talking head that is my favorite based on some random ideas or the way he looks or talks, and then whatever he says I will repeat in public as my opinion, which, is a debatable kind of opinion, you could say. So, I'm just going to free form this one. I'm going to freewheel and try to tell you a little bit about this model, this MetaFlow model that I've made, and I'm very interested to see if it's useful. Now, I'm not only doing this for you to explain something to you, I'm also doing it for me, so I can see how this goes and where I end up. And this particular video will just be the introduction to the MetaFlow model, because I think it's a very deep model that lends itself for a lot of exploration of a lot of things. But I want to tell you a little bit about how I arrived at this model. Now, I need to keep an eye on how long we are recording, because the camera that I use has a maximum recording time of 20 minutes. It's a built-in limit, so I can continue recording after that for 20 minutes again, but I need to pay attention, because if it shuts down, we're all fucked. I've also brought my whiteboard, which will be the first time I will use it on a camera. It's just a small whiteboard. I have a big one for myself, but I figured, it could be very useful to draw things out, and especially thinking about the MetaFlow model, I think I can show you some things visually. I'm trying to make this into a series, meaning the MetaFlow model I want to explain well and I want to spend a lot of time with, But there's other things I want to talk to you about as well. And the way I see things going in this channel or in other channels, because I have a few, is that I'm dividing things into 3 subjects. They're either free form, I'm going to talk about whatever I like. They're either looking at the context of life and consciousness and how it works. And this will also entail human adulthood, spirituality, enlightenment, all these things. And then the third, it will be probably somewhat of a practical, what I'm thinking is like the practical theory series, where I will look at how things work. Right, I made a video a long while back that I've posted on some sort of channel, which says that, you know, there's 2 things you can learn from someone. It's what they see, and I think a lot of people talk about that, right? People make channels and videos and TV shows talking about what they think the world looks like. But more importantly, you can learn how to look, how to see for yourself what the world looks like for you. And I think that is the kind of there's the freewheeling, and then there's the division between those 2, the meta and the flow, right? That's what I see. The meta is the theory about life, and the flow is the practicality about life. Now, the challenge is that I'm just talking, so it's all theory from here. But that's good, because that way I can keep emphasizing for you that it's you that need to apply this whole thing in order to become practical. So there's no value in this whatsoever unless you do something with it. All right, that being said, let's start talking about the MetaFlow model, which is basically a theoretical model that helps me understand the development of things. And let me just tell you the story of how I came up with it, because perhaps it's interesting. You see, the MetaFlow model was something that I didn't call a MetaFlow model when I first figured it out. It was just something that I saw was going on when I was playing poker. I played poker for a long time. And I had a few years where I was really into it, and I was, you know, trying to become pro, or whatever you would call it. I was making money with poker, and I just wanted it to be enough so I could not have to do anything. Basically, that was going on. I'm not sure when that was. I would say it was the early 2000s or something. Is that feasible? Maybe a little later. It was before everyone started playing poker, which made poker a very interesting game, because there was like 2 groups, right? There was the pro pokers, the guys that were doing it for a while, that were really good. And then there were the new guys, right? There was new people coming into the tables every day. It was crazy. It was awesome. It was easy to make money if you paid attention. Now, poker in itself is an interesting game, or card game, or whatever you want to call it. And I think I should make a movie just looking at that in the future. Just like, we're recording. And I really like poker in that regard. I think, and I realized later that that's something that we have with whatever we do. But to me, poker feels like it's a game where you have all the elements of life come into the game, right? But it's condensed, right? It's all about stress and lying and money and making decisions and dealing with uncertainty. And it's just, right? It's pride. It triggers so many things that it's a very interesting game to me. Even though it's a very simple game, because it's so well connected with money, it really fucks with your ego. That's basically what's going on. Because you could, right? I mean, the Bad Beat Store. It's a great example. It's like dealing with life. I made all the right choices and still this happened, right? He had 1 out, and on the river the out fell, and you know I was working him like 30 minutes just to get to that spot where he would wide-eyed walk into my trap, and then he walked into my trap, and then on the river the 1 outer fell and I lost everything. Life is unfair. I played it correctly, right? It's awesome. I love it. I don't play it that often anymore. To me, it became a complete grind, right? If you figured it out and you're just doing it and you're just working the 2 or 3% edge that you have, it's like, I got to play 8 hours to make a couple $100 or not make anything, and that's just a daily thing. Not so much, right? I didn't like it. But what happened is that I tried to figure. I was thinking about poker a lot, right? I was trying to figure out how does this work and how do I get an edge in this thing. And what I realized after a while is that I would say that the most important skill, I mean, there's a couple of levels in poker, and we'll go through that, I guess. But I would say that the most important thing to learn about poker is that you need to be able to put your opponent on a hand. You need to have an idea of what your opponent is doing. And the term for that is you need to have a range, right? You need to put your opponent on a range, a hand range. And what does that mean? It means that in theory, when someone plays poker, right, the other guy or everyone at the table but you could have any hand. They could have any two cards, and in a way it's totally unpredictable, right? The only thing you know is you have two cards in your hand, maybe there's some cards open on the table, so that is the information you have. And all the other cards are invisible, they're unknowns. So you can never know what your opponent has, in theory, right? If you have a pair of kings and there's ace, 5, 8 on the table, right? If your opponent has an ace, you're beat. So how do you know if the opponent has an ace? Well, you never know until he shows you what he has. But it becomes very important to see and to realize that people have a way of approaching the game. And the way of approaching the game has to do with their idea about the game. How well do they understand it? It has to do with their caring for money. Do they care about money? Are they playing, at a stake that is actually too high for them and it's very exciting, or is it a stake that is so low that they're not even interested anymore? These are all factors that come into play. And what you realize is that if you're able to put your opponent into some sort of category, into some sort of idea about his character and the way he plays, that tells you something about what kind of hand he will have in his hand, right? What his hole cards might be. And not exactly, but in a range. And, you need to take factors into consideration here. Poker isn't a very straightforward, easy game, right? It has to do with many things. It has to do, like in a tournament. How far are we in a tournament? How close are we to the money? Where at the table is he? How much chips does he have left? How many chips do other people have? I mean, there's like a lot of things to take into consideration to decide what is the most likely way of acting for someone. But that being said, there's one basic part that determines his hand range, and that's his skill as a player. And that is where I started focusing. And so what I realized is that if you start playing poker until you're, if you start playing poker and then you play until you're a really good player, you go through a certain development. And I think it's a pretty predictable development, meaning I think everyone has that same pattern in a way. And we all have our individualistic interpretation of those patterns, and we all have our own, characteristics, so to say, or the way we approach life or think about life or what we believe or what we see. So we're all individuals, but there's a big pattern that we all have when it comes to learning or acquiring a skill. And that pattern is what I drew out for the poker, and which led to me calling it the MetaFlow model and seeing it as some sort of way of how human development works. So let's get to that. And in order to do that, I need the whiteboard. All right, let's see how this goes. I hope the focusing goes well too, because this camera has a way of focusing that I don't know how it works, or if it works if we have a whiteboard. Anyway, whatever. All right. Yeah, it looks good. Do you see anything? Yes, you can see something. All right, that's great. Okay, so what I realized when it came to playing poker is that, in theory, someone can have every card in his hand as a whole card, right? But they don't have every hand in their whole card, right? People have a specific way of approaching the game, and that determines how they play. And what I realize is that there is a connection between skill level and the range of hands. Now, there's a lot of other factors that come into really deciding what someone has, right? And if you would like, we could go into that another time. But for me, there was a very clear connection between, on the one hand, skill or understanding of the game. I don't know if you can read this at all. I don't even know if it's shown correctly on the camera, because it has, right, so there's skill going from top to bottom, and on the other one, this is what I call the range of hands. right? That is the connection that I saw. And what I realized is that if you just start playing cards when you're playing poker, you're pretty much crazy. You want to play every hand. You play poker just to play. You want to win, right? Every hand you're like, oh, I can win with this, because you don't understand exactly what's going on. So if you just started, if you're a new guy, if this is the possible range of hands, that's pretty much your range of hands. You haven't learned that 7-2 offsuit isn't really a great card. You haven't learned that, you know, if you're under the gun, which means if you're the first to act in the first round and you have Jack 10 offsuit, you're not going to be too happy. You'll play it if you just start playing, because you're like, well, Jack 10, right? I could make a straight, I guess. I don't know. Maybe there will be 2 10s. So that's what you do, is you play every hand. Now, as you are playing and losing money, because this is not a winning strategy, if you're approaching it as, hey, I might win this hand, so I'll play it. What you start doing is you start understanding poker better. You might even read something about poker. You start figuring out what are the rules, right? That's what you do. And as you figure out the rules and you start learning about probability and you start learning about all these things that come into poker, you start narrowing your hand range. Because your skill increases, you narrow your hand range. Because the next time you get a 7-2 offsuit, you realize, look, I've lost money every time I play this hand. This is not going to work. Let's just drop that hand. We'll wait, right? And as you become better and better and better, and not exactly better in results, but as you understand the game better and better, what you will do is you will work towards this point where you think you're playing what they call correct poker, right? And it's an interesting game, because poker, just like life, is half logic, half emotion, right? What you learn if you play poker for a long time is you don't play your cards, you play your opponent, right? It's not about what cards you have, it's what card they have and what they think you have. But before you get there, you think in terms of probability. You think in terms of what are the odds of these 2 starting cards to become a winning hand? Okay, if a certain card hits the table, that changes my probabilities. Is it still the best choice, right? You could pretend that poker is just a game of probability, chance, and logic. And if you do that, and at first you do because you have nothing else, right? You realize that you're not winning, and you start looking for some sort of idea of, okay, how is that? And what you end up is realizing is that your hand range is too wide, and you're defying the probabilities that could help you win. So you will narrow and narrow and narrow and narrow your hand until you become very tight. And tight means you only play the cards that are really well. Now, some people never get past that, right? They realize that, especially if poker is a hype and there's a lot of new players coming in, that is a winning strategy. You know, you don't have to worry about anyone, just play the odds and you're going to be fine. Now, if you are a person who wants to really explore poker and really try to get the most out of it, what you start to realize is that this is all fine and well, but it becomes way more interesting if you take emotion into this thing. If you start not playing your cards, but you start playing the other players. And what you start to realize is that it isn't exactly about what hands you have as so much as what hands you represent or could represent. And what you represent has to do with your image. How do people view you? And so if you are playing these cards, you'll become known as a tight player. And then every now and then, maybe when you're feeling, I don't know, dangerous, you'll play some sort of crazy hand. And you'll notice that everyone folds, right? You're opening up under the gun with the 7-2 offsuit. And everybody's like, because they think you have king or something, because you usually only play your great cards. So when you're playing here, you're realizing, wait a second, I have this image, so it's not that relevant what card I have. It's more relevant that I dare to play it. And so what you end up doing is, as you pass the understanding of the formal logic of poker, you start adding your own. You start taking the theory and applying it to how it works for you. And your hand range opens up until you are an enlightened poker player that can play any hand and play it well. Whereas when you were a starting poker player, you could also play any hand, but you were just losing because you had no idea what you're doing. And that is what I realize is somewhat the model for human development. It's the model for enlightenment, right? The mountain is a mountain. The mountain is not a mountain, and the mountain is a mountain again. Now, I will come back to this in the future to explore it a little bit more. But this model is something I will use a lot. And basically what it is it's about levels of skill and levels of understanding or seeing or context. And what I noticed, and it started with poker, is that when people start at something, there is no limit because they have no skill. So every action is available to them and they might do it. Now usually it ends up going nowhere because they have no clue about what they're doing. They will tighten up, they will become more formalized, they will work more towards doing it the right way, the way the teacher told them. And once they own that, if they're doing it, if they're happy about it, they're excited about it, they will continue and adapt until themselves. Theory, practice. That's what's going on. And this is the model I want to come back to in the future. So hopefully it's something you understand and we'll come back to soon. If you have questions, let me know. Talk to you. See ya.